There are two big stories that developed this week that may best capture the frustration that many Americans seem to feel about what's going on with the coronavirus in the United States. One occurred last night in Michigan. Amazing. Armed citizens stormed the Capitol. And then another occurred earlier this week in New York, where members of the Hasidic Jewish community disobeyed rules about large gatherings by taking to the streets in mass. Here is RT correspondent John Huddy.
Protesters stormed the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan Thursday, demanding to be allowed onto the House floor as Michigan lawmakers debated an extension to Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer's emergency coronavirus orders. Whitmer extended Michigan's state of emergency orders until May 28th, a move that will keep many businesses closed, particularly bars, restaurants, and casinos, while opening some other retail establishments and allowing people to use parks, boats, and to play golf. Still, protesters, some wearing bulletproof vests and armed with guns, demanded the entire order be lifted and the entire state be allowed to reopen. So far, there are more than 41,000 coronavirus cases in Michigan, with close to 4,000 deaths. President Trump tweeted his support for the protests in Michigan, writing, quote, "The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry. They want their lives back again safely. See them, talk to them, make a deal." The scene in Michigan is one of several other recent protests against state coronavirus emergency orders. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, April 20th, hundreds of people protested the governor's shutdown orders there through May 8th, when the state plans to start gradually reopening its economy. And another scene unfolded this week that made headlines, this one in Brooklyn, New York, where the NYPD, on orders from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, broke up a Hasidic Jewish funeral for a well-known rabbi, where hundreds of mourners at least packed the streets. De Blasio blasted the gathering, tweeting, "Something absolutely unacceptable happened in Williamsburg tonight, a large funeral gathering in the middle of this pandemic. When I heard, I went there myself to ensure the crowd was dispersed, and what I saw will not be tolerated so long as we are fighting the coronavirus." De Blasio followed up with another tweet saying he instructed the NYPD to start handing out tickets or even arrest anyone gathering in large groups, writing, "This is about stopping this disease and saving lives, period." He later apologized for lashing out at the mourners, saying he spoke out of passion and frustration and has great love and respect for New York's Jewish community, though adding,
"The notion that people would gather in large numbers, and even if they didn't mean to, would spread a disease that will kill other members of the community is just unacceptable to me."
For the News with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
Hey, what's going on, fam? So that video y'all just saw was obviously about the news that white people are all over the nation are protesting the coronavirus restrictions. And notice there aren't any black people out there. So the reason why I want to talk about this is two things. Is to learn about the mentality that white supremacy creates among a lot of white people. And also B, how it further shows the propaganda about black people being the so-called face of this virus. Because as you guys know, I made a video talking about the real faces of the China virus. And I was pointing out how in my area, the people I see, even when we were in the heat of the, still in the middle of the lockdown, like, everything was locked down still at its height. And I would see white people violating the social distancing orders. I was telling y'all how my apartment complex had to lock and chain the amenities because I live in an apartment complex with majority white people, and how they were just using the amenities and still not social distancing in the amenities, even though there were signs telling them that the amenities were shut down and please not to use them. They just didn't lock them up. And because people kept using them even with those signs, they had to lock and chain them. I was telling y'all how there were white people were having gatherings. I could hear the parties in the apartments. And just to let y'all know, I live in Georgia, one of the first states to lift the restrictions. And as soon as the restrictions got lifted, yes, a lot of black people ran out and started doing stuff, but the main people that are out gathering, bars are back open, restaurant, everything's basically back to normal. People are acting like it's back to normal. In this video, you see white people protesting all over the country. it shows white people do not like having their freedoms restricted for any reason, and in some ways that's a good thing. Black people can learn from that because that's a anti-oppression instinct that white people have, where any limiting of their freedoms makes them rebel. Now, obviously, it can be a bad thing, like in cases like this, where there's a dangerous disease being spread and you're putting yourself and others at risk. But in normal circumstances, this is an instinct that black people lack. Now, in this case, it's kind of a bad instinct because it's too extreme to be wanting to jump out when it's just not right to do it, especially when a second wave will be worse than the first. If we have a second wave, it's going to be worse than the first wave. So you have to be very cautious with coming out of and lifting the restrictions on the first wave. And I do not think any of these states have waited long enough or have been cautious enough or have enough testing to open up. Yet the main people who were violating the order while we had restrictions, and the main people who, even as the restrictions are being lifted, and the people that the restrictions are being lifted for, because remember in that video, I pointed out how even then people were starting to protest against the restrictions. So when restrictions started getting lifted, and I was pointing out how it was mainly the conservative white supremacists, the more bold, open, more hardcore white supremacists of the two sides, even though liberal and conservative is just two sides of white supremacy. The white supremacists who are on the conservative side, they're more bold, they're a little bit more hardcore. That's why a lot of black people think that they're the only racist and somehow the Democrats are our friend, and they're not. But again, that's another video to talk about that. I've talked about that enough. White supremacy, left and right, same thing. It's just they display different behavior traits. But again, notice it was the conservative side of people that were mainly the ones trying to come out and protesting because they need to get back to business because they're losing money. See, people have you thinking white society is so financially stable, and it's only black people whose livelihoods are destroyed by losing a job. No, a lot of white people live paycheck to paycheck. A lot of these businesses can't go more than a month or 2 weeks without money coming in before they collapse. White society is propped up by government. It's propped up by our system. They're not just these stable, hard workers who have stores of cash. Otherwise, the coronavirus wouldn't be a crisis for them, and they wouldn't be trying to come out before they should. Because that's the other reason. It's partly because of their instinct to not have their freedom restricted, but the other and the bigger reason why they're out protesting is because they need to make money. And they're not vastly more stable than black people. A lot of black people, oh, well, black people, we live paycheck to paycheck. White people, we got to stop buying Jordans. White people be saving their money. No, they don't. And the coronavirus is exposing that Sambo talking point. Number two, the solution could be coming from the government. All the government has to do is issue hazard pay for essential workers, prioritize getting money actually to small businesses instead of to corporations who should have billions and trillions of dollars of reserve. That's why we're supposed to, so-called, according to the Republican side, look up to big business and respect CEOs because they're so responsible and they got their money because they're the wealthiest, smartest people. Or they got their wealth and they are the wealthiest people because they're the smartest, most hardworking, most creative. They have the most ingenuity of our society. They're supposed to be the smartest. They're supposed to know to have millions of dollars saved up in a rainy day. But because they don't, because they're corrupt, and because they spend all their profits on stock buybacks to increase their salaries as CEOs and executives while finding ways to cut benefits for employees, or cut salaries or keep hourly costs low by paying employees low hourly wages, we're bailing them out. The people that these people are protesting should really be mad at is the failure of the government to protect them from economic catastrophe during this virus. But you know why they're not protesting for a universal income? Just for not forever, but for just for a couple of months, instead of using the inefficient unemployment system, which a lot of people don't even qualify for unemployment because they're independent contractors or business people, and the small business loans are getting taken up by corporations on top of the money that was specifically designated for corporations. You know why they're not protesting against any of that? Because this is the other side of white supremacy. White people don't want anything coming from government that might potentially benefit black people, even if it harms white people. A lot of people wonder why conservative white people, who again are the main people out here protesting against the restrictions, why conservative white people, working class conservatives, vote for Republicans, even though they're obviously screwing over working class white people as well as black people. You know why they vote for Republicans anyway? Because they don't care if the policy hurts them as long as it hurts black people more. And they know that piddly $1,200 and using the inefficient unemployment system instead of giving out a universal income for a couple of months and giving hazard pay to essential workers just for a couple of months, they know that what we're doing now is hurting black people more than it's hurting them. But it's hurting them so bad that they still have to protest to have the restrictions lifted off of them. Because another thing that y'all should peep is a lot of them are saying, hey, we don't have to lift the restrictions everywhere. We just need to lift the restrictions in quote unquote rural areas, which is quote unquote areas where it's nothing but white people. The areas where Negroes are the population is strong, yeah, y'all can keep locking down that area because it's a quote unquote urban area, which is a code word for black people. But please do not have restrictions on us because we are starting to not be able to survive. Now, yes, we don't want you to go out and do something that would make it so that we wouldn't need to protest because we would still have an income, and you would and we would our businesses would still be kept afloat because the money that was allegedly set aside for us would be actually coming to us instead of going to corporations. Instead of protesting for that, they're like, no, because that's going to hurt black people more than it hurts us. So that's okay for y'all to do that. But what y'all can't do is make us lock down like you have the Negroes locked down. You can't do that to us. We're white. And those are the two main psychologies behind this, is the fact that they don't want black people to benefit from anything, even if that thing also benefits them. That's why they're not protesting for a universal income. That's why they're not protesting against the corrupt government, the corporate crony government giving away all the money to corporations instead of small business owners. Instead of protesting against those two things, they're protesting against the restrictions and are willing to put everyone's lives at risk because that's better than doing something that's going to help a lot of black people by giving out a universal income of $2,000 a month for 4 months so everybody can stay safely locked down. Like I said, that and the freedom aspect that they can't tolerate. But anyway, fam, if y'all want a little bit more in-depth video, basically talking about the same thing, go look at my video about the real faces of the China virus. What I'll do is probably just put the link to that video in the description box. But this is just a brief rant talking about the protests that happened again this week, and there were more protests all over the nation. And oh yeah, by the way, fam, remember these conservative white supremacists went in the state capitol with guns in order to protest or in order to show how much they are displeased by the fact that their freedom is quote unquote restricted. by these lockdowns. They went out there with guns. Now remember, family, the last time black people went in the state capitol with guns, they changed the gun laws. Republicans, the pro-rights Republicans, they changed the gun laws. When the Panther Party went up in the California state capitol, or maybe it was a mayor's capitol, but I believe it was the state capitol, with guns, conservatives, Ronald Reagan, the conservative icon, passed gun control laws in order to stop Negroes from coming up in the state house with guns. And we know that that was still happening again today. If black people went up in the state house with guns, new laws, gun restrictions in place the next day by Republicans. But white people, conservatives, go up in the state capitol with guns because they want to risk their lives and everyone else's lives, because they would rather go back to normal business and go back to the illusion that white people can never have their restriction ever, their freedom ever restricted in any way, rather than protest for universal programs that would also benefit black people in this time. Nobody reacts. Nobody panics. Nobody institutes gun control laws. And if they did, the conservatives would be outraged. The same ones who are all about gun rights, except when black people have guns. But anyway, fam, that's another video. That's my rant. Like, share, subscribe, and peace.